I didn't get this meme off the internet. I created this meme myself. And I created this meme in October of 2018. I made this meme before the season even started. And that's because I've seen the Sharks in this situation and in this end result one too many times. In case you missed it, on May 26th, Gary Bettman scrapped the end of the 2019-20 season and he would construct a 24-team playoff structure, which means 7 teams in the NHL were eliminated. As a result, the Sharks missed the playoffs for the first time in 5 years. What I've seen in 30 years of watching Sharks hockey, or at least following Sharks hockey, missing the playoffs doesn't happen too often. So I'm going to go down quickly the laundry list of what happened when the Sharks missed the playoffs. 91-92 season, 39 points, dead last. They were an expansion team. What do you expect? There is only one exception to the rule in the past 30 years, and that's the Vegas Golden Knights. 92-93, 24 points, dead last, and they actually held the record for most losses in a season with 71, passing the 1972-73 Washington Capitals. As a result, their first coach, George Kingston, was fired. We'll flash forward a couple of years to after a couple of playoff trips. The Sharks were terrible again. In fact, in the 1995-96 season, they didn't win a game until early November. That's how bad they were. And 47 points, they were the worst team in the West, and they were just ahead of the Ottawa Senators. Kevin Constantine and Jim Wiley were fired. The following season, this is the season I kind of started sitting down and listening to the games on the radio and watching them on TV, and they had another horrible season. They were 1 point out of finishing dead last, 62 points, last in the West, 1 point ahead of Boston, and you know the result in the 1997 draft. Joe Thornton first, Patrick Marleau second. Al Sims, he was a former assistant on the Mighty Ducks. He would only coach one season with the team. And now we go to the early 2000s, 2002-03, 73 points, dead last in the Pacific, and they just missed last place by 4 points over, guess who? The Columbus Blue Jackets, who were still finding an identity. And they fired Dale Sutter, who got them to the playoffs in every season in his tenure with the Sharks in December of 2002. And then they went to the playoffs almost every single year except for this one, 2014-15, 89 points. They weren't the worst team in hockey, but in today's NHL, 89 points is just not going to cut it anymore. In fact, 95 points doesn't get you to the playoffs anymore. They missed the playoff spot by 8 points, and Todd McLellan would walk. They didn't fire him, they just parted ways with him. And now this past season, rock bottom. I mentioned it in my last video. It's the first time since 1997 they were dead last in the Western Conference. 63 points, dead last in the West. That month in December killed them. They only had 2 wins in the month of December. As a result, they fired Peter DeBoer, the only coach to take them to the finals, and strangely enough, he is now coaching the Vegas Golden Knights. One weakness I've seen in the San Jose Sharks since 1990 was Game 6. Before I really dive deep into that, let's take a look at all the times they've been eliminated. Remember, 0 Stanley Cups, 1 finals appearance. So let's look at their failures in the short term. Looking at this screen, I can literally count the short series in one hand. So let's start with the sweeps. Strangely enough, they were only swept twice in their history. So 1995 against Detroit, Detroit was out for blood. They scored 6 goals in each of those wins. So Detroit was out for vengeance after their loss in 1994. 2010, they played Chicago, and Chicago swept them, and that's just because they got hot. Antti Niemi, who would end up playing for the Sharks the following season, was just no one could score off of him. Now we go to the failures in 5 games. 2000 against the Stanley Cup champion, and at their time their bitter rivals, the Dallas Stars. I don't think the Sharks belonged on the same ice with the Stars. The Stars were defending champions. The Sharks, I think, were gassed after that 7-game series against the Blues. 2011, Vancouver. Vancouver was the better team. As I mentioned in my last video, both their goalies, Roberto Luongo and Corey Schneider, got the Williams-Jennings trophy. They shared it. And Vancouver ended up going to the finals and losing in 7 games. The following season, St. Louis. I think the Sharks limped their way to the playoffs in 2012. They had a great first half, and I mentioned it in my video between the Sharks and the Blue Jackets. They had a great first half, and then after the All-Star break, they were mediocre, and they limped their way to a 7th seed. They stole Game 1, an overtime winner against the Blues, but after that, the Blues took care of business. And strangely enough, in 2000 and 2012, Ken Hitchcock coached both of those teams. Also, on one hand, I can count the times they lost in 7 games, starting with the beginning, their first trip at the playoffs against Toronto. Game 6, I'll dive deep into that a little bit, but they weren't able to finish them off, and they ended up losing in 7 games. The same with Colorado. Colorado were the defending champions, and they weren't going to give that trophy up really easily. 2013 and 14, both against the Kings. 2014, well, I think a lot of the hockey world knows what happened there. And 2013 is going to be a rare moment in this phenomenon I'm going to talk about. And now we get to the last scenario, losing in 6 games. And oh my goodness gracious, look at all those years. I'll break all this down, but look at this. 3 occasions, consecutive years. And remember, there was no season in 2005 because of the lockout, so this is considered a consecutive season. 3 straight here, 5 straight here, and 4 straight here. So you can tell going into this video that Game 6 has been a problem with them. So allow me to break all this down for you. Let's start with the positives. When the Sharks got the job done in Game 6, you can count on one hand. So let's start with here. 2004, Colorado. The only reason why I went 6 games was Sharks had a 3-0 lead on the Avs. They lost Game 4. They came home, lost Game 5 in overtime, but they were able to finish the Avs off in 6 games back in Denver. The same deal in 2010. The Sharks dealt with the goalie named Craig Anderson. Colorado was an 8th seed to the Sharks 1 seed. And once the Sharks figured out Craig Anderson in Game 5, they had no problem in Game 6. 2011 against the LA Kings, it went double overtime and Joe Thornton scored the series winning goal. That's another rare Game 6 elimination win. And same with this one. Not only did the Sharks beat the Blues and avenge 2012, they went to the Stanley Cup final and they did it, winning a series in 6 games. And now here's kind of the flip side of it. And for the most part, it's kind of a mixed bag when they lose when they're leading a series 3 games to 2. We'll start here. 2 instances, Detroit and Toronto. Now, against Detroit, the Sharks were up 3-2, and they got smoked in Game 6. I think it was over by the first period. And then the 7th game, the Sharks bounced back thanks to Jamie Baker, and they shocked the hockey world. Toronto, it hurt a little more. Johan Garpenlov didn't take a shot. One of the shots in overtime for the Sharks hit the crossbar. Mike Garner ended up scoring the game-winning goal for Toronto, and then in Game 7, Toronto ended up winning the series. 2000 against St. Louis. Game 6 was on an Easter Sunday. The Sharks had the Blues on the rope. They were leading 3-1. They lost Game 5. They got ripped in their own building by the Blues in Game 6, but the Sharks didn't blow it, and they ended up shocking the world and beating the Blues in 7 games, and the Blues were the President's Trophy winners. 2002 against Colorado. That was another series where the Sharks dropped Game 6 and Game 7 if you observed it earlier. Now in Game 6, a weird thing happened during that game, an earthquake. And I think that gave Colorado a little momentum, and they ended up winning the game in overtime, and then they would shut out the Sharks in Game 7. 2008 against Calgary. That was a fun rematch after 2004. The Sharks ended up losing Game 6, but they came home and won Game 7. It was the very first Game 7 at San Jose, and Jeremy Roenick, who's now pretty much a public enemy #1 of Sharks fans, came up really big in Game 7. 2011 against Detroit. They meet again after meeting in 2010, and the Sharks end up dropping Game 6, and that was their 3rd straight loss against the Wings in that series. The Sharks almost blew it, and they ended up winning Game 7 at their own home building, but it was getting a little scary. 2014, do I really need to go into details? I mean, Sharks fans remember, the hockey world remembers, the sports world remembers. The Sharks couldn't even get anything going in Game 6, and Game 7 came along, and on the 20th anniversary of upsetting the Red Wings in 1994, it's just nothing. That team was dead. It was like watching a cancer patient die. That's how brutal 2014 was. 2016 against Nashville. They lose in overtime, but they bounce back and they crush the Predators in Game 7. Same deal with Colorado in 2019. They lose in overtime, they bounce back. Of course, there was that controversial offsides call, but if you read Rule 83.3 in that good old rule book, it means that Gabriel Landeskog was offsides and that goal did not count. The Sharks ended up holding on to winning that series and going to the conference finals. Okay, now let's look when they were trailing 3-2. And let's begin on an optimistic note here. In 1995, they didn't have Arturs Irbe. Arturs Irbe committed a game misconduct in Game 5. The Sharks benched Irbe in Game 6, and Wade Flaherty went on to have a career moment. And the Sharks would stave off elimination, take the series back to Calgary, it would go double overtime, and the Sharks would win the series. 2013, first time in 18 years. So this is how Game 6 has hurt this franchise over the years, when they forced a Game 7 for the first time in 18 years. They beat the Kings, and then of course they played Game 7, and they ended up losing that series. 2019 against the Vegas Golden Knights. With all apologies to Knights fans, this was when you blew the series, Game 6. The Knights were on the power play, it was double overtime, and instead of putting the Sharks away like they should have done, Tomas Hertl goes on to score a shorthanded goal. Game 7 ends up happening, and you know the rest of the story. 4 goals scored on a 5-minute power play. This is their Achilles heel. When they trail 3-2, they almost never save the season. So let's begin, and this has been happening since 1998. 1998, they were facing the Dallas Stars. I was happy they were back. They made a series out of it. The Dallas Stars were the best team in hockey, and they took the Stars to overtime in Game 6. Lost it. 1999, Colorado. Once again, lost in sudden death overtime, but they had a weird scenario. Because of the Columbine shooting, the Avalanche said, you know what, let's start the series in San Jose, which they did. The first 2 games were at the Shark Tank. The next 3 were in Colorado, and the Avs were up 3-2, and all they had to do was take it back to San Jose for Game 6, and they ended up winning. 2004 against Calgary, Western Conference Final. Game 6 was the only game in that series where the home team won, and that's all the Flames needed. Flames stole 2 in San Jose to open the series. The Sharks went to Calgary and took 2 back. In Game 5, Calgary won that, and all the Flames had to do was come on home in the Sea of Red and win it. 2006, the Sharks were the top seed after the first round, 5-8. I was there for Game 5. The Sharks ended up losing that game. In fact, it was a game where Edmonton stole the momentum from Game 3 on. No matter what the Sharks did, the Oilers didn't take the momentum. They seized it and they wouldn't let it go. And in Game 6, Oilers ended up winning that series. 2007, I think if Patrick Marleau would not have been the GOAT in Game 4, the Sharks would have won that series. But they lost in overtime, the Red Wings won in Game 5, and they finished the Sharks off in Game 6 in 2007. 2008 against Dallas, another lower seed when the Sharks were the 2nd seed. It was a 4 overtime game, and thanks to a penalty by Brian Campbell, the Stars ended the 4 overtime marathon in Game 6. 2009. Whenever I go to a Sharks game and I see that President's Trophy banner hanging from the rafters, all I see is a wasted season. 6 games was how long that playoff run was. They lost to the Ducks. They got outmatched by them. And then for a while, getting eliminated in 6 games didn't happen until the Stanley Cup final in 2016. The Penguins were just too much for the Sharks and Peter DeBoer's tactics, and they ended up winning in 6 games, and as a result, they ended up taking the cup out of San Jose. 2017 against the Oilers. The Oilers were going through a resurgence. They had Todd McLellan as a coach. Connor McDavid was doing wonders for the Oilers, and old coach faces old team, and it ends the same way. Edmonton was just the better team that series. The Sharks were just running out of gas. 2018, my friend who lives out in the Vegas area, he's a Sharks fan. I took him to his first Sharks game. He was there for Game 6, and everyone saw the Vegas Golden Knights as a buzzsaw. No one expected them to do anything, but when they played Vegas, they ended up getting smoked. And that's what happened to the Sharks. And the final instance, 2019 St. Louis. I guess the Sharks ran out of bribe money because the hand pass should have been called in Game 3. I'm going to go ahead and concede that. But the Blues were just battering the Sharks badly. Billington was playing out of his mind, and they wore the Sharks down. I was there for the watch party in Game 6, and there was just no way the Sharks were going to beat the Blues in Game 6. So, if you've been paying attention, keeping score, the record of the Sharks in Game 6 as of 2019 is 7-21, and this is from 1994 to 2019. On top of that, they had a 2-13 record before the 2010s. So between 1994, when they started going to the playoffs, and 2009, they only won twice. Once to force a Game 7 in 1995, one to eliminate a team in 2004. So you could say their Game 6 record has been slightly improving when they were 5-8 in the 2010s alone. But still, if the Sharks keep getting eliminated in 6 games, these are the kind of memes I'm still going to be making. Change my mind. win the Stanley Cup in 6 games. Thank you for your time.